Audience. Ever since quarantine started, I think we've all noticed a little void in our lives. It's been a shift in schedule, and we haven't been able to enjoy the same hobbies and different activities that we used to enjoy. But I think there's nothing better to fill that void than with something sweet. I decided to take up baking, and I've put all my effort into mastering this one family recipe that's been passed down for generations. And I have that original recipe as my guide, and my mother as my teacher. But I'm going to let you in on that little trade secret. I'm going to show you the ingredients, the steps you need to follow, and how to best enjoy your homemade chocolate chip cookies. The first step that's vital to your success is what you decide to mix in. I prefer a Bosch or electric mixer like this because if you use just a bowl, mixing as you go on, your dough is going to get a lot thicker. You're going to tire yourself out. But a word of caution when using an electric mixer. You need to keep it on a low setting because when you use a high setting, it'll beat your dough too thinly and your cookies will turn out much flatter. Your ingredients, you're going to need white sugar, brown sugar, shortening, margarine. The original recipe actually called for butter, but just like cooking, it requires a lot of experimentation. So we switched to margarine because butter would leave your dough and cookies with much more buttery and salty flavor. But we want our margarine just to serve its purpose of being a fat to help mix everything together. Then we need our eggs, vanilla. Keep in mind, vanilla is very potent. You don't need a lot of it, and it's expensive. Then you need obviously flour, salt, baking soda, not baking powder, because baking powder is actually 3 to 4 times stronger than baking soda. Then you need your chocolate chips, obviously. But I'd recommend using semi-sweet chocolate chips because if you just use milk chocolate chips, you can make your cookies far too sweet. Now, this step, baking is a lot like chemistry. How much you use of each ingredient and when you employ them is vital to your success. So first, you're going to be creaming together 1 cup of white sugar, 1 cup of brown sugar, 2/3 cup margarine, and 2/3 cup shortening. What's important with your brown sugar is that brown sugar, when you pour it into your measuring cup, it will sit very loosely. You need to make sure it's packed down, make sure you get all the brown sugar that you need. Like I said, you need it creamed. So when you have these all mixed together, you're going to mix it for 2 to 3 minutes. If you're doing it by hand, it's likely going to take longer. But mixing it for 2 to 3 minutes until it looks creamy. It's going to look shiny and more liquid. Keep in mind, especially with an electric mixer, stuff is going to get stuck to the insides or the middle of your bowl. Make sure you always have a big spoon or spatula on hand so you can be scooping it out and make sure everything's being evenly mixed. After you mix that for 2 to 3 minutes, you're going to switch over and add 2 eggs and half a teaspoon of vanilla. I usually prefer Mexican vanilla because it adds that extra sweet kick, and it's cheaper if you ever have the option to get it. Again, mixing that for 2 to 3 minutes. As you add more at this stage, it's going to look a lot more liquidy, but that's because we haven't added the flour yet. Now, in this final stage, you're going to be adding 3 full cups of flour, a teaspoon of baking soda, and a teaspoon of salt. Important note with the flour, if you don't already know, it acts a lot like dust. It'll kick up and fill up your house with a bunch of flour. In this stage, you may want to have a protective covering and make sure you're mixing on a much lower setting or intermittently because you want it to mix evenly and not make a bunch of mess. And from this point on, it's really about your own taste. Everything you do from this point on is about your own enjoyment. When I was young, I preferred my cookies and dough with no chocolate chips. I preferred one even taste, no change in texture. So, if you choose to do so, now would be the time to add your chocolate chips. You need 1 full cup, again, that semi-sweet chocolate chips, and you'll want to do that in the same way you did the flour. They have a tendency to kick up, you want to make sure it evens out. You want to make sure your oven is set to 350 degrees, and how long you cook your cookies is dependent on what kind of cookies you want. I prefer mine much gooier, so I tend to lean on the 11-minute side because 11 to 13 minutes you're going to be cooking them. But if you want them crispier, you want that crunch, you'll set it to that 13-minute setting. Once it comes out of the oven, it should look something like this. However, with baking, it can be very unpredictable. Sometimes you won't be completely consistent with the amount of each ingredient you use, and frankly, dough is just very temperamental. But really, it's about your own taste from this point on of how best you want to enjoy your new treat. You can have it by itself, just go plain. Or you can add a cold glass of milk, the classic. Or sometimes I like to spice it up and have a glass of hot cocoa and just really go all in. You can take 2 cookies, put ice cream in the middle of that, and you got yourself a great treat. But the best way I always like to enjoy my cookies is just in cookie dough. There's always been controversy because people are so worried about having salmonella because they're having raw eggs, but because 2 raw eggs behind possibly 3 dozen cookies, realistically you need to eat the entire batch to get that much raw egg in your system. But at that point, I think your concern is you ate 3 dozen cookies as opposed to 2 egg yolks. In the end, it's really about your own taste. You can experiment, see what you like, you can use whatever ingredients you have at hand, use butter if you want, see if you like it better. But I think we can all agree that the best way to enjoy your cookies is in the company of someone else. Or you can still just eat them all on your own, because who's going to stop you? Happy baking.